Zephaniah chapter 2. And let me tell you, little places we're going. Prayerfully, we'll get through chapter 2 tonight. Prayerfully, next week, chapter 3. We got Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi left. And then we're going to do a little thing on Genesis, a 12-week study on creation. So, which could be kind of neat. So that should take us into the summer, hopefully. So that's where we're going to go. Go ahead, get it over with. No? You lost it? You lost it? Let's pray before Sam sneezes. Lord, as we go into this wonderful prophet of Zephaniah, help us to see exactly what he was seeing at that time, the changes that had taken place, the reforms that were happening around him, and which can sometimes excite people as they see their people seemingly coming back to worship, to be part of the system that God had set up. But we know that from Zephaniah's standpoint, he saw the outside, but God had relayed to him that the inside of these people had not ever changed. There was no revival, there was only reform. And as we go to this, we want to see what was happening to those people. Not only that, we want to have the application for us and the implications for our lives, and not for our lives now only, but for the future, as we see that nation still developing, and a relationship with you is so necessary, and that you are a God who extends grace and is long-suffering, and you put those together, even though in the midst of rejection and time of turning away from the Lord, you're still reaching out to people. And Father, we thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen. So Zephaniah chapter 2, we have dealt with an interesting look at this prophet. This prophet is a prophet whose name means Jehovah hides his treasure, or hides. And as we look at this, I think that's a very interesting understanding as we get into some of what's going on. I do want to set up some background, not only for tonight, but for next week, that we really have to remember, because by going from book to book to book, and the minor prophets, and what for 2 years we spent some time in Ezekiel, it set the stage. The time frame is about 640 to 620 BC. That means the captivity of the southern kingdom by Babylon has not taken place. It's on the horizon, I guess is the best way to say it. It's near. The northern kingdom has been in captivity, scattered. That's coming to an end. The Assyrian power is dying down. Josiah is now the king of the southern kingdom. He's a good king. He started reigning as a child. We kind of talked about that previously. But at the same time, the religious system of Israel is still in operation. The priest goes into the temple. There is still a sacrificial system, and the Shekinah glory, God's presence, is still in the tabernacle. So that's still going on in the backdrop of all this. So I don't want you to think, and I think sometimes when we see this, the minor prophets are stationed so far after Ezekiel that God's presence is no longer there. He's already let the Shekinah, which is the glory cloud of God, is gone, and God's not there. No, He's there. That presence is still there in the midst of what's going on. And how far would these people have to go to really seek an audience with God? Not very far. He was there the whole time. They still had the priesthood. That stuff, that sacrificial Levitical system was still very much in play, but not for much longer. We can't really nail the date down when it happens, but we know that Ezekiel, Daniel, and his friends go into exile somewhere around 606 BC. And when Ezekiel sees his visions, he sees them by the river Kabar, which is, he's already in captivity somewhere, probably in Iran, which is kind of interesting. So he sees these visions, and by Ezekiel 10 is when the Shekinah departs that temple. So I don't know if that kind of sets the stage, because I want to do that, because when it says in chapter 2, it opens with verses 1 and 2. It says, "Gather yourselves together, yes, gather, O nation without shame, before the decree takes effect. The day passes like the shaft, before the burning anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger comes upon you. So again, we can see very clearly that this nation is growing closer to its sentence for the apostasy it has set forth. They are called together to gather together and to seek. Those are the two main drives of these. Verse 1 says gather. Verse 3 will say seek. So we will see. Again, God is extending a wonderful chance. Another, I don't know if we can ever add up how many chances God gives, but God extends another chance to Israel to repent before the coming invasion of Babylon. And it's still time because he says, gather yourselves. So that's showing, and it's very, the Hebrew is very interesting here. It's an intensive, reflexive action. It says, and it's an imperative. So you put all these things together. He said, it's almost screaming at you, gather together yourselves for your own benefit, kind of idea. It's very intense. Let us, and since Zephaniah is saying it, he's saying, let us gather ourselves together.
Is this like in the past tense or the future?
No, it's in the right now. It's let's do this now. Not for us. You mean for us?
Yeah.
No. For his
His
presence, for the Hebrew people at his time. This is what he's saying to them to gather together. Well, are you in chapter 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look down at 5, it says, and I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant.
Okay, we're not getting there yet. We'll get there. Don't go so far. We're in verses 1 and 2. I know, but we're in 1 and 2. Okay, he's calling for them to do this. This is for what Israel to do before he pronounces the woes. You notice that there'll be woes down there. Okay, those are the judgments on other things, and we'll get to that. And judgment, maybe that'll help us a little bit. Judgment has a domino effect in this chapter. In other words, it starts in an area, goes to another area, goes to another area, and then finally goes back home. So Israel, Judah, we're dealing with Judah, even though I constantly say Israel, because at this time it's still a divided kingdom. We're just dealing with Judah. The southern kingdom, because the northern kingdom, which is known as Israel, has been already split apart. And he's saying, let us gather together. Again, we're going to go to some verses to see some things that are similar. So go to Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5. Remember, always put a bookmark in when we start these books, because remember, we're dealing with the people of Israel, and there's certain things they were told and certain things they were aware of, and that they would understand as far as gathering, what the impact of the word gathering, that's what we're looking at. The impact of this word gather means to these people. And just for conversation, we got to get context. So we're going to have to start in verse 1. So Exodus chapter 5, verse 1, it says, and afterward Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and besides, I will not let Israel go. So it's very intuitive of him that he says, who is the Lord? So he's not saying, I don't know him. He just, it's not part, what is he like? But he says, I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. So there's not a relationship between this Pharaoh, who's the god of Egypt, and that's what his place is as that. And then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he will fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. And the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you draw the people away from their work? Go, get back to your labors. In other words, go do your job. Get out of my face. Again, Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now many, and you would have them cease from their labors. So the same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters over the people and their foremen, saying, you will no longer give the people straw to make as brick, to make brick as previously, let them go and gather straw for themselves. So when you hit them with the word gather, they remembered what happened in Egypt. Sometimes, ever have a smell that brings back a flood of memories? Okay, this is a word that should bring back a flood of memories to these people. It's very intricately tied to these people. Look down at verse 12. So the people scattered through all the land of Egypt, and they gathered stubble for straw. Could you imagine what that would be like as they went all around and gathered up, and they went all this, and it says that they had gone all over the land of Egypt. I don't know if that's a universal all. Sometimes we will say, I looked all over the house for my keys. And you didn't find them? If you looked everywhere, wouldn't you have found them? So that's the kind of understanding I look at. They went everywhere that they could, and they gathered stuff and brought it back. But the gathering, the laboriousness with that, I think is the idea here. And not only that, what it did as a nation for them. They gathered as this nation. I think that's the word impact I want you to see. So go back to Zephaniah, because I want you to see what it's leading to. So since this idea of gathering together, and it has a purpose, it says, gather yourselves together. Yes, gather. So not only is it a word that will tweak a memory, it's also said 2 times and in 2 different ways. Isn't that kind of neat? You want impact on words? Bring back a word that very much reminds them of their historical past. Tell them to do it, and tell them to do it twice. And why is he calling this gathering together? And we pretty much know why. This nation had an outward reform going on, but no inward revival. And he wants them to what? What do most people need that are in this situation? They either, if they're saved, they need to come back to the Lord. They need to grow again. They need to establish that relationship that's always been there. They've wandered. And if they're not saved, they need to be what? Saved. So either way, it's a call to a relationship with God. We call it repentance sometimes, but I think we lose the meaning when we use it loosely like that. Repentance really actually was more used in the New Testament for a change of mind. This is a change of direction back to God. These people had a very intimate relation. Remember what I said at the beginning of class? God's on campus. They saw the Shekinah. Okay, it was a vivid understanding. They saw the constant sacrifices going on. But they had wandered from that relationship. We'll see later in a few different places that their relationship, they were doing it artificially. If they were doing their sacrifices, they were just doing them. They were running on automated ways of doing things, rituals, habits, whatever you want to say. And he goes on to say, and what requires this in this gathering is for them to do some examination. Notice what it says, "O nation without shame." A nation without shame. I think another word would grasp you is they didn't have a longing for God. They had lost that longing for God. This is a nation that should have been ashamed of what they had done with God, how they had left Him. I think sometimes the thought comes in our mind is they should have known that they were unworthy of the grace they were getting, but grace, the idea of grace, you should know you're unworthy, right? So it's kind of hard on the ears to grasp that. God has extended time for them to come back to Him. They haven't recognized that time, and they were without shame about it. It didn't bother them that they had so wandered. We're going to go through some of, not the indictments, but just go to chapter 3, verse 1. We'll get to it next week. But I want you to know what we're dealing with. I think this will help. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, "Woe to her who is rebellious and defiled and the tyrannical city." So that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people that are within this time period that are rebellious, defiled, and tyrannical. We'll dissect that next time a little bit more. But when you plug that back in and you say a nation without shame, that's why. You see where they're at? And kind of grasp what's going on. I think if you were to really look at it and you would see where they're at, Wouldn't this magnify God's grace as God extended grace to them and they would receive it? What does it say later in the Gospels? That those who have sinned a lot and are forgiven, they're more thankful sometimes, aren't they? When they realize the depth of their depravity and God has saved them out of that, and they're so much more thankful. Where's Israel at with that? God has how many prophets has He sent to them? I mean, we've gone through 8 now. This is the 9th, something like that. Just minor. We went through Ezekiel major, and then there's Jeremiah, and there's Isaiah, and there's Daniel. I mean, He sent prophet after prophet after prophet. Have we seen a change in this nation? And if we set precedent by looking at their kings, that's a whole mess in itself. So it's interesting. The prophet does something similar to what some of the New Testament writers will do. He's got this idea of we'll gather ourselves together. We need to gather together. We need to do that. He's not saying you do this and I'll be a part of it. He's basically incorporating himself into this, even though he's probably, he's redeemed. Probably got a really good standing with the Lord. The Lord's using him as a prophet, as a mouthpiece. But here's what he's saying. He says, gather together. Let's kind of summarize this one verse. Gather together when grace seems unavailable. It's still available, even though you stand not longing for God. I guess that's the bottom line of this verse. Kind of get that, where he's setting this up? Because he wants them to know where they're at. And then when he says, before the decree takes effect. In other words, there is a short time. Again, we know the time because we know that over the horizon, the Babylonian hordes, beginning with what we know as the Chaldeans, came first. They're still the Babylonians, but their group was considered the Chaldeans. And Babylon grew, and they took over in 606 and took in groups after groups of, and then scattered Jerusalem and Israel and Judah. But he says, do it now. Just notice what he says, though. He uses a really good term. Until the day passes like chaff. Kind of think what the day looks like. You know, this is something I really come to grasp with as I get older. Days go faster. I don't know what it is. It's the days go faster. I think I told you this once. A lady once told me when she retired, she woke up with nothing to do and went to bed with so many things left undone. So I think that's because the time just, where does it go? I remember sitting, this is sixth or seventh grade, looking at the clock, and I swore it took an hour to go from 5 to 3 to 3 o'clock. It just didn't move. You're looking at it like that clock doesn't do anything. And as you get older, time just, but that's what time is. Isn't it like shaft in the wind? It just blows. So what the prophet is calling for here is do it fast because it'll be gone before you know it. And notice what he says, not only before it takes effect, but he gives them two more befores. He says, before the burning anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord. So I think when we're talking about words, and we keep seeing these words repeated, that means do it now, do it quickly, it's coming. I don't know how else we could say, and we've kind of done a lot of work on the day of the Lord, so I don't really want to get into that. We know that it's a time of God's wrath. A time period of God's wrath. And then he says, really, really nice, he bedposted, I guess is the best way to put it, seek the Lord. Seek the Lord. That's assuming a bunch of things, isn't it? When you say to somebody, seek the Lord, that's assuming a few things that are very honestly and openly that they can seek the Lord. That there's a volitional choice for them to go do that. And that the Lord can be what? Found. In this, it's kind of almost, wow, it's like, we're in Jerusalem. Look, we have a system here. Go seek the Lord. But what does that require? What does it require for you to recognize that you've got to go seek the Lord and that He can be found? Well, it says it right here in the next part of the verse. All you humble of the earth. There's a humility when you got to go seek the Lord. Because up until that point, who's the God in your life? You. Until you realize that you need the Lord, So these humbles, these people that are humble, it says humble all the earth. And I really think this is really not a good translation because it sounds like a universal call. I think when he's speaking to Israel, when they use this word, I think he's saying, humble yourself, you land, in the people in the land. He's talking specifically to the people of Israel here. Know how I know that? Who have carried out his ordinances. The ordinances were given to Israel. The ordinances, or in some cases the justice or the law, the words are kind of interchangeable. But notice what it says. He says, seek the Lord. And then he says, seek righteousness. Seek humility. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. So how do you escape the Lord's anger? You come to the Lord. You seek Him. Which is interesting. Go back to verse 6 of chapter 1. Because we've already kind of dealt with that a little bit briefly when we did chapter 1. Chapter 1, verse 6 says, and those who have not sought the Lord or inquired of Him. This is a group of people we already know about that haven't done this. And now he's saying, probably to the same group of people, seek the Lord. So they haven't sought Him. Now he's saying the same thing. So we get another glimpse of God extending grace again. Another time that they can have to seek the Lord. And with what's involved in that, when you seek the Lord, righteousness is involved and humility is involved. Now, it's interesting because I think one person once said quite a while ago, at some point all the Jews will be exterminated. That's what the Bible says. There will never be a Jew left. And over the course of history, many times the Jews have been tried to be exterminated. Obviously, since I'm here, it didn't work. Didn't work. I like to be a living proof of something. But however, since the Jews were not exterminated as a race, there was always some called the remnant that were left. I, again, understand that. There's a believing part of Judaism that believes in the Lord and does come to the point of changing their mind about the Lord, seeking the Lord, humility, understanding His righteousness. But understand what it takes. Do you understand what it takes today when you present the gospel to a Jew and they have to humble themselves? I want you to understand it's not something like, oh, you're so into yourself, you're not humble. That's not the idea. The idea is understanding that God was right and God holds the attention of being right, and that in order for you to understand who He is, you've got to seek Him, not say, we're good where we're at, we have our rituals, we have our things, we have our mitzvahs, we're comfortable. I think a lot of Jews hang on to the idea that they're Jew by race. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we only have two races in this world. Well, actually, we have one race, the human race, subdivided in two groups, Jews and Gentiles. That's all it is. So when you're talking about race, go to the Bible, see what the Bible says about race, Jew and Gentile. So when we do that, and we go into that understanding of that, the Jew today can't be humbled because they've been cut off and they've been blinded by God and blinded by Satan and blinded by their way. And there's a multiple blinding going on. And for them to come to the Lord, they've got to be humbled. They've got to seek Jehovah. They've got to seek righteousness, not of themselves. Turn with me to Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy chapter 16. You know, when you talk to people that have a Jewish background, they're very much, most of them, and I say this, I haven't done a survey of every one of them, they're pro-Israel. They want the land to be Israel. They know it's their land. They've been ingrained with it in their land. That's their land. But they forget the order of things. So look at verse 20. Deuteronomy 16, verse 20. It says, justice and only justice you shall pursue, that you may live and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you. So that if you're about the land, you have to understand the order of things. You just can't get the land and not have a relationship with the God who gave you it. You can't have the land and not have justice, and you shall pursue this, that you may live and possess the land. That land giving was part of God's relationship with them. So they've departed from that. Look at Isaiah 51. Isaiah 51, that's a different book now. I should hear pages turning, unless you got Isaiah 51, unless you have one of those iPads things. So we see he's dealing with another idea of righteousness. When we say righteousness, it's pursuing justice. They're similar words. That's why I went to Deuteronomy 16 too. Isaiah 51 verse 1 says, listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, who seek the Lord. So they're inseparable terms. Okay? When Isaiah is calling out to the people, he says, listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham, your father. So when he's talking about the rock and the quarry, he's talking about Abraham. They were carved out of a family that God had chosen out from the human race, and He made them a special race unto Himself, and they were carved out of it, and they were to be ones that pursue righteousness, seek the Lord. Look down to verse 7. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, a people whose heart is my law. Do not fear the reproach of man, neither be dismayed at their revilings. I'll be all right. Okay, revilings, we'll get it. The idea here is, though, we see these people were people, their main thrust was to pursue righteousness, seek the Lord, to know Him, to have a relationship with Him. And this, and only this, that Zephaniah is calling out to these people, these two ideas together as one, are the only way to escape the day of the Lord, the day of wrath. Which is interesting, because when we know the Lord, we're escaping what? His wrath. So, I hope there's a lot of understandings out there that say that we will still be punished as Christians. We'll have to get in that another time. But we don't. We've escaped it. We're no longer under the wrath of God. We're under what? Grace. Not only grace, we're under what? Huh? We have a special relationship with the Lord. We're in Christ. If we punish me, He's got to punish His Son. Just think about that one for a minute. Okay? And again, since we're in Isaiah, go to Isaiah 55. Go over a few more chapters. And I think this is kind of akin, I don't want to say parallel, but it's kind of akin to Zephaniah. A really neat verse here in Isaiah 55. Except Isaiah doesn't he takes a long time to build to this place, whereas Zephaniah builds it up by the second chapter. In 55 verse 6, it says, seek the Lord while He may be found. Now that doesn't mean God's going into hiding. We got to read that the right way. You're not playing hide and seek with God, but there's only so much of your life before you die that you can seek Him. Somebody once asked me, how many chances does someone get to be saved? How many times do they get the gospel presented? I have no clue. Kind of think of that. How many times did you hear the gospel before you're saved? You don't have to tell me, but just think about that for a minute. And then you were led to the Lord. Then there's other people that have never heard the gospel, except maybe once. And they say no. And God's just God. There's certain things I don't understand, but it does say, seek the Lord while He may be found. Call upon Him while He was near. So again, what it's saying here more than anything, and it's a very intensive form of the verb, seek the Lord. In I think it's 1 Corinthians where it says, I beg you, be reconciled to God. That's the same kind of terminology. Paul uses it differently, but it's the same idea. I beg you, You've got only so much time. The clock is winding down. Do this. Or else, in this case, what we're looking at is the day of the Lord is coming. Go back to Zephaniah. Let's go to verse 4. These are the ones, now we're going to deal with the surrounding cities that are going to bring this wrath, or helped bring some of this down on Judah. But what's going to happen to them in lieu of that? So these are the predictions of judgments on the surrounding nations. Now kind of listen to this for a minute. This is kind of interesting. These are predictions to the surrounding nations of Israel. Just think for a minute. How often has demographics changed? Yet the demographics of that area have not really changed. Isn't that kind of fascinating? So when you say, now, God can still put it together whether the demographics change or not. But since the demographics haven't changed, isn't it so much neater to say Bible prophecy is very prevalent and, what did you say? Well, yeah, it's exact, but I mean, it's very much in our face all the time, though, because when they say certain things, we go, oh, I know where that is. How many times have we heard about the Gaza Strip in the news? I mean, in my lifetime, it's like all the time. And then we got an area called Gaza here in Zephaniah. And we'll talk later about Egypt and Ethiopia, and there's still places, we know where they're at. But yeah, we'll bring up Moab and Ammon, but they're there. They're called Jordan today. I mean, it's the same areas, almost the same people groups. I'm not doing one of those, let's check their DNA and see exactly their blood types and what they are, but I'm pretty sure they're the same people groups that have been there for quite a time period. And here's the interesting thing. The nation of Israel is surrounded by enemies, and knowing, as they know right now, that they're going to be carried off in captivity, and it's coming from the east, this captivity, these people that will come, and they're constantly, and as Zephaniah is prophesying, it doesn't only go for his day or his near day, but it goes beyond that day, because guess what? We're beyond his day, and these people are still the same people group that are surrounding Israel, and they haven't had any final judgments as of yet. Now, I don't know where Zephaniah did his prophecy, but I can almost envision he's on a highest part of Jerusalem, and God's saying, look in this direction, let's talk about these people, and look in this direction, and we're going to talk about these people, and let's look in this direction, we're going to talk, and then look straight down, because we're going to talk about where you're at. So that's kind of the idea. We're going to look west, okay, we're going to look to the east, and then we're going to look south, and then we're going to look down. So if you want to get a breakdown from now to the beginning of chapter 3, so that's where we're going to kind of look. Now kind of think of this for a moment. Let's get a historical perspective on things since I brought up the remnant. In the times of Abraham, how many believers that were of the Hebrew race were there? Say it another way. We could just say a handful, right? We could say Abraham. We can say Sarah. We could say, give me somebody else. Isaac. And then Abraham, probably we can go to, Abraham was probably alive when Jacob and Esau were born. Was Esau? I don't think so. I have arguments for Ishmael, but not for Esau. I have none for him. And then he had 12 tribes. And we know that family was taken into captivity, and there was a number that was given us, 70. So we can take into the captivity, there were 70. The remnant was 70. Okay? Later, they're called out of Egypt. They're scattered. They die in the desert. The next generation goes in. Then later in the times of Elijah cries out to God, I'm the only one. I'm it. Nobody else is me. I'm all alone. And God says, no, let's rethink this. And God gives him a head count. God says, there's 7,000 more. So in Elijah's time, we could say there's 7,001. Okay? We know today there is a remnant. That means out of Israel, there are some that are saved Jewish people. How many are there? We're back to the number few. Okay? We know in the times of in Romans chapter 11 that there's going to be a remnant, and that remnant will grow to a point that all Israel will be saved. So even though we're talking in not such precise terms, that means no matter what's happened in history, there's always been two races. And out of this, both races, which here's really neat. God created the human race. Out of that, He called out the Jews, so there was Jew and Gentile. And out of those, there was a remnant of saved from the Jew and a twinkling of Gentiles that had come over. Okay? Then there's a time period that we're in today called the church age. There's a remnant of Jews that have joined with the Gentiles that are also a bigger remnant, but they're more of a growing mass than the Hebrew people, and they've come together as one body called the church. So there's still two races, but subgroups in those races. In the millennial kingdom, there'll be all a nation of Israel that will be all saved and some Gentiles, and then until that time, everybody goes into the eternal state, and all will be saved, and it's not relevant at that point. But it's interesting with why I'm saying that is because God has constantly done everything He can to extend grace to all people. But these people had a special side to Him because He gave them His oracles, He gave them His prophets, His priests, He gave them His presence, and they still were in a state of rejecting Him. So as we go into this idea, Zephaniah's message, in the midst of external reforms, he's still looking for revival from within. And wrath is coming, and it's on the precipice of happening. And he says, here's what you're going to see, Israel. I'm going to give you something that you'll really understand what wrath is like. I'm going to give you small doses of it by extending it to the people around you, and you're going to see what it's like. I'm going to carry out certain phases of my wrath, and you're going to see what it's like. So he says in chapter 4, and it's interesting, God always says, look to the nations and you'll learn something about what you're like. Now here's something for us. Let's just take 1 second and apply it to us. Do we learn something by other nations' falterings from God? Or do we just say, hey, see, they get what they deserve because they don't have a relationship with God. They've cast God out or whatever. Or do we learn something? And I think we should always learn something by people's rejection of God and the repercussions from those rejections. So let's look at verses 4 through 7, and let's look what happens to the west. I love the roll call. He gives a national roll call. He says, for Gaza will be abandoned, and Ashkelon a desolation. Ashdod will be driven out at noon. Ekron will be uprooted. Woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast. Woe to the Kerethites. The word of the Lord is against you. O Canaan, land of the Philistines, I will destroy you, so that there will be no inhabitant. So the seacoast will be pastures and caves for shepherds and folds for flocks, and the coast will be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They will pasture on it. In the houses of Ashkelon they will lie down at evening, for the Lord their God will care for them and restore their fortune. So far the roll call is pretty neat. He's done basically talking about the Philistines and the coastline. It's interesting. Of the 5 great cities of the Philistines, he's only names 4 of them. He says Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron. Which one did he leave out? It's like a test. I always found this fascinating why he left this out.
Jordan, I don't know.
I'm going to name it and you're going to get... I'll name a guy that came from there. How about this? Goliath. There you go, Gath. He left out Gath. I think that... And this is just a personal preference. Gath. Goliath came from Gath. Gath. I think this is personal. I think he left it out because at this time... that area was mostly occupied by Jewish people. That it was a big city of Gath, but if you look where it was a sister city to one that I can't think of the name, but just was in and out and then gone again. But it was a sister city. It's like, which you want to get rid of, Minneapolis or St. Paul? Kind of idea. St. Paul's not so good. We'll keep Minneapolis, but they're still there. So. Notice what he says, though. He says, Gaza will be without inhabitants. Ashkelon will be laid waste by invading nations who take her inhabitants by force and exile them from their land. Ashdod will be taken at noonday, which is interesting. Destruction at noon is probably, remember, it's very hot in this area. And just like anybody in a hot area, when it's really hot, you hang out for a while. You carry out your work at different times. So basically, I think this is what they're saying is at time of heat, when they were taking their siestas, when they least expected it, Ashdod would be destroyed and they would be filled with sheep pastures, which is interesting because that's a really difficult place for sheep to be outdoors anyway. So Ekron would be uprooted, plucked up, uprooted, and cut out. These are all uprooted from their stable and long-owned places. Remember, they're still in what is known as God-given territory for Israel. They're in the Promised Land. So God's dealing with these people that are in the Promised Land. There were the Kerethites, which were probably Philistines who lived along the Mediterranean in an area called Chereth. A group of who lived there. It's kind of interesting. According to history, this was a city established for mercenary soldiers known as the executioners. You know, your force of a city of assassins kind of thing. And since Philistia is known as Canaanite, they were basically the Canaanite people. It says it in verse 5 where it says, "O Canaan, the land of the Philistines." Remember, Canaan was to be wiped out by the Jewish people coming in. They were not to leave any people left, and they didn't do it. So this is part of their disobedience to God, that these people are still left there and dealing with that. It's interesting. Just again, a thought. God says Israel's going to have the whole land. The world today says Israel can't have the whole land. Every time we turn around, Israel's giving back something. And if you ever notice, it's like giving back of what? We don't have much left. The city that should be their capital is decimated by every religion in the world, just about, that thinks that's where their religion should meet. But there's going to come a time, and I think this is what we're looking at here in Zephaniah, where God will systematically clean the Promised Land for His people to have it. And how do you do that? Well, you move all the people out. God says, no, I'm not going to move them out. I'm going to wipe them out. So, and notice that the lands will be converted for pasture land. And pasture land is a picture of people at peace. Remember what Psalm 23 says. The Lord is my shepherd, and He will give me what? A place to lay down in my pastures and relax. So as He does this, the land is converted to pasture land, and the idea of the troublesome Philistines will be over with. Even though today we hear of the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, the West Bank really isn't that area, but I think that's attributed to that area kind of thing. But the West Bank is more inland, even though it's not. It's the West Bank of the Jordan, not the West Bank. Anyway, verses 8 through 11 is the east. So we're going to move east now, which would be Moab and Ammon, Moab and Ammon, which is interesting because today it's modern Jordan, another wonderful place to be. They're taking all reservations for anybody that wants to go there for vacation. Good luck. But let me tell you something about Moab and Ammon. Know why they're around? Anybody know who they're related to? Moab and Ammon. Abraham, closer to what? Who said it? Lot. Somebody said Lot. Who said it? Lot. They're Lot's children through his daughters. You want to talk about a family problem? So not only I always thought this was kind of fascinating. Could you imagine a conversation Lot and Abraham had as they went into the Promised Land, and God says, I'm going to give to you, Abraham, a land that is absolutely fertile. And they're standing on the mountain, and Lot says, I got to get away from you, and I want that land out there. And he's pointing out to the fertilest of land, probably at that time. And Abraham says, go ahead, because I still got all the rest. And God said, it's all going to be what? Fertile. Doesn't that man have faith? You can take the best, what looks the best now. Now think about what it looks like today that he picked. It's the worst, because God destroyed it, because a man decided to say, I want what I want, not what God wants. He put himself first, and not saying, I'm going to be close to Abraham because he's a godly man. I want to be associated with this man. I want to be part of this. And then life just gets so much better for Lot after that, right? And we know Lot's saved. Isn't that amazing? We know Lot's redeemed because Abraham bartered all the way down just to save him. And then he comes out with a wife and daughters, and the wife looks back and she turns into a sheep lick stick. A big pillar of salt, and his two daughters got to get him drunk so they can get pregnant because they think the end of the world is coming. And I don't know how that works out, because God's got to be the most amazing God that it's... Anyway, the logistics of that, it just blows my mind. And those two children grow up to be one of the worst enemies of Israel. And they're kin to the Jews. Distant relatives. And if you look at all the people that are fighting with the people of Israel, the Jewish people, they're all just kin folk. The Hatfields and the McCoys just can't get along. But that's where these two people came from. And the reason I gave you that is because if you look in verse 8, I have heard the taunting of Moab. You ever have somebody in a family that constantly taunts you? A cousin that's just a repulsive person, or just a brother or sister this is the idea, so you can get the idea why it says what it says. Moab's taunting Israel, and the revilings of the sons of Ammon, with which they have taunted my people and become arrogant against their territory. Therefore, as I live, declares the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab will be like Sodom. Interesting. And the sons of Ammon will be like Gomorrah, a place possessed by nettles and salt pits, and a perpetual desolation. The remnant of my people will plunder them. That means basically Israel's, as they move in, will take what's left, because they won't be alive to take. And Israel will vacuum up for themselves what these people have left. And the remainder of my nation will inherit them. This they will have it in return for their pride, because they have taunted and become arrogant against the people of the Lord. In other words, God takes care of the enemies of Israel. Again, God is what? The battle is mine, says the Lord. What is Israel doing to lay hands, to align like these people? They're doing nothing. Verse 11, the Lord will be terrifying to them, for he will starve all the gods of the earth. I love that. And all the coastlands of the nations will bow down to him, everyone from his own place. Then he goes to the south. If we had some time, we probably could go into some of what the high points of the history of Moab and Ammon. Maybe we'll do that a little bit next week, but I really want to kind of wrap up the chapter, and then we could probably go back to that a little bit next week, because I got a couple of pages of interesting stuff. But we'll go to South Ethiopia. It says, you also, O Ethiopians, will be slain by my sword. Kind of in the back of my mind, I will always constantly hear people say, oh, the lost tribe of Israel is the Ethiopian Jews. I don't know where that ever came from. I have no idea where that ever came from. First of all, there's no such thing as a lost tribe. If God lost and can't figure out where they're at, something's wrong. But there is no lost tribes. But it does say the Ethiopians. I don't know what part they play, because one of the biggest churches as church began to grow was in Ethiopia, believe it or not. But Ethiopia probably makes some kind of alliance with Egypt, is what I can think of at this time, that this is going to be carried out. And he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and he will make Nineveh a desolation, parched with the wilderness, and the flocks will lie down in their midst. All the beasts will range in herds, both the pelican and the hedgehog. Interesting combination of animals. And I think, if anything, you got to think of the pelican is probably it's a disgusting bird. First of all, I don't know. Have any of you ever seen a pelican? They're just. I got to build when I was younger. I built a place called Pelican Reef. It was a boat dock, and there's what? Pelicans. They're disgusting. Because what do they have to do to eat? They have to cough it up, eat it, cough it up, and that's what that thing is. Yeah, well, I was trying to be nice. I'm on the internet. They're regurgitating their food. And if they miss, it gets everywhere, if you get a visual on that. Basically, because of that, they were unclean. I think in the King James it says cormorant. Some versions may have an owl. I think the best thing is a regurgitating bird. That would be the vomiting bird. Yeah, that's true. Owls did it. That's right. I don't know anything about cormorants.
Is that like a vulture, though?
No, pelican is a seabird.
No.
What?
I mean, cormorant.
Oh, cormorant. I'm not sure. I thought it was the kind of birds that go into the ocean, and I don't know. They use them. The diving birds, aren't they? The diving seabirds, yeah. So they also do the same thing. Either way, it's the idea. Whatever they are, they're unclean. That's all.
Pelican, mine says pelican. For cormorant.
Yeah, mine has pelican too. And the hedgehog, which is probably porcupine, whatever. It's just both of them are unclean. That's all. And I think that's what we got to do that. These birds and these animals are usually associated with places that have been ruined, areas they live in. Not always. I'm just saying this is what we look at. Notice what it says. It goes on to say, the birds will sing in the window. Basically, it's a picture of desolation. The songbird in the window it's a sad song. It's usually from desolate places, and it's very poetic. If your place is desolate, all you hear left is the quietness, and you hear the birds singing, kind of thing. Again, desolation will be on the threshold, for he has laid bare the cedar work. This is an exultant city which dwells securely, who says in her heart, I am, and there is no one beside me. So again, notice there's no humility. There's a lot of arrogance in this city. How she has become desolation, a resting place for beasts. Everyone who passes by her will hiss and wave his hand in contempt. So basically, we're looking that after the storm is gone, and after it's going on, how arrogant they are, and basically, which is interesting, because just let's focus on something in closing. They say, I am, and there is no one beside me. That's what the city's. You have a problem with that? Can you think where else this might have been used, that phrase? Huh? Nope. Say that louder. In the Ten Commandments, doesn't God have the right to say, I am, and there's no one else beside me? Isn't that an Exodus kind of constant that God's constantly saying, I am who I am? There's none beside me? And what are they saying? The same thing God is saying. So they're equating themselves probably to something they've heard over and over again, promoted by the Jewish people. And they've taken words that belong to God alone, and they've made it their own. And that's just not really good. In this case, they're promoting something that is not theirs to be. I notice at the end of this verse, as the royal review passes by, that's the kind of idea. Everyone passes by her, will hiss and wave their hand in contempt. Yeah, I just kind of visualize that what's going on. So. It's kind of a very mind-boggling, because it doesn't stop here. And I'm wondering why we ever have chapter breaks sometimes. Because if you notice, in verse 5 of chapter 2, it started with woe. And in chapter 3, verse 1, it's still a woe. So we're still in the sections of woes. So we'll probably pick up there next week. But God's not done. He's got to do what he's probably reluctant to do, because you don't mind dealing with other people's children kind of thing, but when you got to deal with your own, it's kind of a little bit harder. I know sometimes that role reversal, but some people say, I don't want to tell you, this is not my kid, it's not my business. But when God deals with his children, it will be a very unique way he does that, and how he delineates it will be even neater. So We'll pick up chapter 3 next week. What I want to do, though, next week, and we'll do it briefly, I want to do a little bit on Ammon and Moab, because I think this makes this section a little bit more stand out, a little bit more viable as we understand some of the history of those two national entities. Because the reason I want to do that, too, and I want to be clear, they're still on the national scenes today. They're still around. And if we get a picture of what they do and who they are, we could say, oh, now I get who they are and what's going on over there. And it helps us a little bit with that. So we're going to